The recording started and it's now live. So let me know if you have anything else.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Roger Hartley. I'm Dean of the College of Public Affairs, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to welcome you to the second of our brand new series called Voices of Public Service. Wanted to start by saying thank you for your patience with us. We had a few moments of technical difficulty getting the webinar started, but we are just delighted that you were able to come today and hear a very special guest. I wanted to start by saying a little bit about this series. This series, for those of you who are new to it, is a series that was created by our marvelous William Donald Shafer Center for Public Policy, and it's a relatively new public service academy, an academy that is focused on co-curricular and extra learning opportunities for students that might want to go into the fields of public service. And Dr. Ann Cotton, who's with us today and is my co-host, who leads the Shafer Center, and I decided to put together this speaker series because we thought it would be just a terrific opportunity to have students have an opportunity to learn from the careers of leaders in the field and get a chance to ask questions of leaders in the field about their career journey, where they've come from, you know, opportunities and challenges they faced over time, and things of the like. I also wanted to thank our very special University of Baltimore Career and Internship Center, who is our third co-sponsor alongside of the College of Public Affairs. We really appreciate everything that you do, but the entire focus of this series is really about career journeys for students and getting an opportunity to learn from leaders in our field, like Mr. Donald Fry, who I thank so much for coming to be with us today as our second guest. We're really excited about the series, and we hope that you will continue with us. We have two upcoming speakers for the semester. We're looking forward to, in early April, hosting Mr. Thibaut Manikin of Seawall Development. And we are working with the office of the mayor on having either the mayor or the new city administrator join us for our date in May. So please look out for those opportunities coming up soon, which we will advertise a lot. Last thing that I wanted to say is we are so lucky at this university to have the William Donald Shafer Center for Public Policy. If you don't know much about its mission beyond the Public Service Academy, Dr. Cotton and her team have done a marvelous job. The center has been around for over 30 years, and it provides, in addition to this Public Service Academy, high-level research and training to help public leaders and our governments and nonprofits across the state of Maryland function and make better public policy. And we also offer some very special training programs as well, which Ann might mention. But I wanted to kick off next by introducing, again, my colleague, Dr. Ann Cotton, who's one of the reasons why we have this series. Ann?
Thanks so much, Dean Hartley. Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Cotton, Director of Shafer Center for Public Policy here at the College of Public Affairs. I'm thrilled to have Don Fry here with us today. He's a UB Law School graduate, so he knows a lot about UB way back when has seen us in all different variations of our the University of Baltimore, and it's really exciting to have him here today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from him. I wanted to provide a quick update about the center for those of you who don't know what we do. The Shafer Center's mission is to help government help people, and we do this by improving decision-making by government and nonprofit organizations through our research services, program evaluation, performance measurement, strategic planning, policy analysis. We also offer management consulting services and opinion research. But we also help build the public service pipeline, and we do that through our Public Service Academy with a number of opportunities for students, including our hallmark Shafer Center Graduate Fellowship, where outstanding graduate students, not just graduate students, but the top graduate students work with us in the Shafer Center on our applied research and consulting projects. So the students actually get a flavor for what it's like to work in a consulting entity. And we also have our Community Development Fellows Program. Here we place students in community development organizations throughout Baltimore City. And those placements help the organizations, which are generally small, achieve their mission, but also give students the opportunity to have an immediate hands-on experience where they can see immediate impact and apply what they're learning in the classroom. And then a Rosencrantz Fellowship, which is our newest one, places students in local government organizations. So all these opportunities are part of our vision, mine and Dean Hartley's, our vision for really building out the public service experience here at the College of Public Affairs. And this Voices of Public Service speaker series is a hallmark component of that effort. So for those of you who don't know Don Fry, in addition to being a graduate of our law school, he was an attorney. He served in the Maryland General Assembly and the Senate and the House of Delegates. And he's been with the Greater Baltimore Committee for a long time and really helped shaped a lot of what happens in Baltimore in terms of kind of public policy from a business development perspective. And normally I would give a lot more of an introduction, but I want you to hear from Don himself about who he is, about his career, and about what he does and how students can kind of learn from his experience. So I'd like you to start off, Don, if you would, by telling us a little bit about your career and different positions you've held to now.
Well, first of all, let me thank Roger and you, Ann, for asking me to participate in this program. I think it's a great idea. It's a great way for students to learn about career paths or opportunities that may exist. So I'm glad to be a part of this program. It's funny, when I look back over my 40 years or so and all the different roles I've had, you outlined some of them. One is I go back and I went to University of Baltimore Law School and came out of law school and began practicing law in Harford County, a general practice, a small law firm. Ultimately went out on my own, and after that, after being with a firm, and then had my own, a couple of associates with me. When I was even practicing law, though, there are other roles that I had. Before I was elected to the House of Delegates, I was a member of the Harford County Democratic Central Committee, part of the Democratic Party leadership, and chaired that role. I also was involved in civic activities. I served as president of the Beller JCs, a civic organization, and I worked as a volunteer with the Harford County Chamber of Commerce, where actually it's one of my first entrees into politics in Annapolis to some extent, in that I chaired a committee, advocacy committee, that recommended that they remove the tolls off of I-95. Years ago, they used to have to throw a quarter into the toll, a little toll booth, a basket, before you got on I-95 or off of I-95. So we, the Chamber of Commerce and I led that effort to get rid of the tolls on I-95 regarding testimony in Annapolis and lobbying in Annapolis before I even got elected to the House of Delegates. So I had a number of engagements and roles back at that time when I think about it. But as you indicated, I then ultimately was elected to the Maryland House of Delegates, and then moved on to the Senate of Maryland. And then when the political world came to an end, I was very fortunate to come to the Greater Baltimore Committee initially as the executive vice president and general counsel. And then also about 3 years later or so became the president and CEO. That was in November 2002. And I've been in that role since November 2002. So a little bit over 19 years in that, 23 years total in that Greater Baltimore Committee.
Don, thank you so much. Actually, this question is a good follow-up to where you started going next, which is what made you decide to take on your current position as president and CEO of the Greater Baltimore Committee?
Well, as indicated, I was practicing law. I was serving in the Senate of Maryland. Unfortunately, the voters did not reelect me in 1998. Harford County had a big switch going from strong Democratic to Republican representation. And along with others, I was not reelected at that time. So having a chance to sit back and reflect, I talked to a number of people about what if I was going to run again for office. I had a law practice, was doing well with the law practice. I could keep doing that. I really had no desire to be a judge. People talked to me about, well, this could be a great way for you to become a judge. I really did not have a desire to be a judge. Had some opportunities in government that were not things I wanted to do. But so I talked to some real good friends of mine who I knew from politics and business and said, look, my law practice is fine. If that's what I do for the rest of my life, that's great. But what really gets me going is public policy. So if you ever see an opportunity where I can become engaged in a public policy arena, that would be great for me to do. And I was very fortunate in that one of the people that I talked to was Don Hutchinson, who was the president of the Greater Baltimore Committee at that time. I'd known Don for a number of years and worked closely with Don. Don indicated to me that he didn't have the #1 job. He was at the #1 position, but he did have another position at GBC and asked if I'd be interested in coming to GBC. And with that, I ended up effectively selling my law practice or turning it over to someone else, and came down to the Greater Baltimore Committee and went from an office that had a lot of files over my desk and on the floor to suddenly coming into an empty office with nothing on my desk and seeing where things led. And they've led very fortuitously to this role right now. But Roger, the key was the fact that what really got my juices flowing was public policy. Not that I didn't like practicing law, because I really enjoyed practicing law and enjoyed particularly litigation, which is what I did a lot of. But public policy is what has really motivated me, whether it be any of the positions I've had before or solving problems. I like to address problem solving.
And in this case, opportunity to do public policy that's meaningful for the whole region, which is really terrific. Jan, I think that leads to your next question.
It does. So we all know that you run GBC, but what does that really mean? Like, what is for those of our students in particular don't really know what it means to be in a position like yours, what's your day-to-day job actually entail? What do you do?
Sure. Well, let me start off, I guess, by maybe describing what the role of the GBC is. The GBC is a membership organization in the Baltimore region: Hartford, Baltimore, Howard, Anne Arundel, Carroll, and Baltimore City. Originally, it used to be strictly Baltimore City, but then expanded to become a regional organization in the 70s. And our mission is to bring the corporate and civic community together to find solutions to problems that affect our competitiveness and our viability as a region. So that can range from anything from public safety to transportation and mobility to education and workforce. There's a whole gamut of things that could be included. My role as CEO is to do a number of different things. One is to serve as the executive of the organization, to set the organization's vision, its goals, its priorities. That also, of course, includes management on a day-to-day basis, whether it's be hiring or overseeing staff and implementing the programs and policies that we're recommending to be adopted. It also includes board relationships. One of the uniquenesses of the Greater Baltimore Committee is that we have a strong board of directors. You have to be a CEO or the top ranking person of your company to be a member of the board of directors. So I'm dealing constantly with CEOs, presidents, top ranking people in the business community. We went back and counted, I think over my career, I probably had over 600 different board members, which included CEOs all during that time. So it's quite a wealth of people that I've had the pleasure of dealing with. But then also there's other things, day-to-day activity from, as I mentioned, we're a membership organization. So it's a result. Some of what I do is going out to meet new members, recruit new members, retain members so they don't drop their membership, dealing with public relations on a regular basis, dealing with the media, talking with the media, doing presentations such as this or other opportunities where I have frequent speaking engagements. And then just the other normal day-to-day activity is, or oftentimes is advocacy, whether it be advocating on behalf of the business community on issues that are of major concern to business more than anything else.
Well, thanks, Don. And the advocacy piece kind of gets to this question. It's a long-sounding question, but the end part is going to take you in the direction where you need to go. GBC is really one of the most influential organizations in our region that represents a really diverse mix of organizations, like you were just saying, and also does public policy advocacy, as you just mentioned. It's such an important part of your mission. So the question really is, with so many competing interests, how do you go about setting the legislative agenda for GBC?
It's a great question, and it changes somewhat year to year, obviously. One of the things we do throughout the year is pay attention to issues that are important from a city, regional, or state basis, and to some extent, even a national basis. We got a little bit involved recently, obviously, the national level with respect to the COVID relief packages that came out from the federal level. So what we, being a membership organization, we have a lot of committees, and I mentioned some of the areas that we cover, be education and workforce, transportation, mobility, public safety. We have committees that are chaired by members of the organization and are comprised of members of the GBC. And they help sort of populate and percolate the issues that come up that are important in those particular areas. So sometimes our policy positions are driven by the committee and the committee work and what's the newest thing that's going on in healthcare or something like that. Sometimes it's a continuation from the previous year and what did not happen in the Maryland General Assembly, or they tried to get passed and did not get passed. Sometimes it's the most important issues of the day. I would have told you that 3 years ago, dealing with COVID and relief packages and things of that nature and returning to work would never be on our agenda to pay attention to. So sometimes it's driven by a lot of different factors, some internal, some external, and our board of directors obviously is integral in creating what some of our policy directions are. In the last number of years, we've had a particular emphasis on racial equity and social justice, as well as on workforce development, two issues that were really driven predominantly by obviously factors in the community, as well as by desires and work of our board of directors and what we can do moving forward. So, and then we sort of take those and figure out what are the most important issues moving forward and how do we include those in a legislative package or priorities to Maryland General Assembly or to City Council or county councils.
And for the students, as you can hear, it's a lot of work to set a policy agenda. And, of course, with the legislative session, I can imagine, Don, that goes back to spring before or even early summer before the next legislative session begins. It's a lot of planning.
Yeah, and there's always things that don't get passed on the last day of session. That's usually a good indication that they're going to come back the next year. And then there's also bills that don't pass early in the session, but they're sent to summer study. Sometimes summer study means that they're going to kill the bill. Other times summer study really means they are going to study it and maybe bring it back for the next year. So you have to keep track of what the committees are doing, what the real intent is, and then sort of anticipate what may be the top issues for the coming year. For a couple of quick examples, obviously, in recent years, we've seen a referendum on sports betting. Well, that's a good indication that sports betting is going to come up the next year if the voters approve sports betting. Now we're dealing with recreational cannabis. If recreational cannabis passes the legislature and goes to referendum, there's a good likelihood that there's going to be a lot of debate next session on how you implement the process of recreational cannabis.
Thanks, Don. Thinking back about your career with GBC, what do you think are some of your most significant accomplishments?
Well, it's sort of tough to pick out one particular issue. There's a number of issues that we have been very involved in, and I sometimes look at the GBC and look at what the roles are that we have. And I tell people, I think we have 5 roles as a business organization. I think we need to be bold and visionary. As a former or recovering politician, I don't think politicians can be as bold and visionary as they once were. Because there's a tendency to go to your comfort zone because of the instant communication that's occurring through tweets or blogs or emails and things of that nature. So elected officials have a tendency to go to their comfort zone. So they're not as bold and visionary as you'd like them to be. We need to educate the public and the business community about issues that are important. We need to advocate, as we've talked about. We also sometimes just need to be a pusher, a prodder, an instigator. I think sometimes things get on the right path, but then they get deflected by the crisis of the day. So we need to push and prod and get those issues addressed again. And then sometimes we need to be a partner with business and a partner with government. When I look at those roles, I see we've done a lot of those different things. And just quickly, years ago, when Mayor Martin O'Malley, before Governor Martin O'Malley, we did a report called Managing for Success, where we looked at 5 city agencies and made recommendations of how you could improve service or save costs. But that was a significant work involving about 250 business volunteers in that process. That was a very significant effort, and that led to us doing other types of research type works or recommendation. Years ago, we've spent about 12 years, I hate to say it, but about 12 years working on expanding transit in the Baltimore region. We were the strongest business advocate and really the strongest advocate for the Red Line, a light rail line from East-West Baltimore. That also included our work on advocating for more than 10 years for the need of a transportation tax increase. Tax increases had not been done in state of Maryland for transportation since 1991, probably finally happened in 2013. So that was a significant effort moving forward. But then there's some other programs I've done myself as president that I'm really proud of. One being a Bridging the Gap program, which focuses on minority and women-owned businesses, something I learned about the importance of the private sector from my work in the legislature. Most recently, a Baltimore Women's Advisory Board, where we're really looking at how do we help women advance in the workplace? So wouldn't it be great for Baltimore region to be seen as one of the top regions of the country for women to really exceed in the corporate world? And then some of the other issues that we've had is when we think of advocacy, a lot of people say, the legislature is not business friendly. Well, people don't know what business friendly means. Well, we put together a product where we brought together former heads of economic development and created a report called Gaining a Competitive Edge that laid out what are some of the key pillars for economic growth and job creation. And then most recently, the 2 things I think I'd point to right off the bat would be, one, we're working on a regional workforce initiative, trying to find ways to make sure that we have the workforce that's trained and ready to go in some key industry growth sectors. And also one that's been somewhat publicized of late is the fact that there was concern that we were going to lose the Pimlico and the Preakness. And we were actively engaged in making sure that Pimlico was refurbished, redeveloped, but also would make sure that we kept the historic Preakness here, which is certainly almost like a yearly Super Bowl for Baltimore.
Right, it absolutely is. And thanks for that. That's an amazing list of accomplishments, to say the least. And I know there's so many more as you've gone through your presidency. A different question, kind of looking towards now in the future, what do you, Don, see as the most pressing issues for our region? And then maybe afterwards, what role do you think the GBC might play in addressing those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of issues. Some of them, unfortunately, some of them are ones I've already talked about because they have a tendency to come back periodically moving forward.
Sure.
And we're not always fully finished with what we're working on at this given time. But I think transportation is clearly going to be a major issue. I think we're going to be looking at different ways of how we commute to and from work and to and from different places, whether it be more transit in the region, different types of transit, whether it be just all options that are available. It is a key for economic growth and job creation. There's no doubt about that. So that's a major portion of it. Workforce. I mean, we're looking to really see this region grow in some industry sectors, particularly in building construction, healthcare, IT, and business services. We need to make sure that they're ready, that we're have the workforce ready to go in that area, and that they're trained, and people that like you're involved with on a regular basis are providing the type of education that's really needed in the workplace moving forward. So that's critically important. Public safety is something that is a major concern, not only in Baltimore City, but we've seen recently across the country and even in the region that we've seen some public safety issues start emerging on a regional basis. And more so than they have in the past. Not that they haven't always had problems, but they're seeing some more developing than previously. And then the last one I think is we're going to be dealing with a post-COVID world. We really don't know what exactly it means to return to normal. What is that new normal going to be? What does it mean for the workforce? What does it mean for families, from childcare to education, information technology at their home, things of that nature. As far as what the business community is going to be doing, I think you're going to see the business community engaging in all of those at different levels. As I said, transportation is one where it's key for economic growth. Public safety, that's an issue that the GBC has been talking about and really raised the bar, saying that public safety is not just a tragedy for the people who are affected by it, but it does have some direct impact on economic growth in a community as well. And it is a tragedy for people who are affected by it, but there is an economic component to it also. And of course, workforces and education is what keeps us moving forward and advancing in our world. And COVID, we're just going to have to keep adjusting as best we can and come up with solutions to deal with it as we move along. And I think overall, as a society and as a business community, we've handled COVID pretty well over the last 2 years. Not easy by any stretch, and we still have a lot to deal with and a lot to learn moving forward.
Absolutely agree, especially on the last point with COVID. Every organization is seeing what telecommute means and what the worker of the future might be like and what an office of the future might be like. And it's a great place for GBC to be alongside a lot of organizations right now. Thank you for that.
Don, a lot of our students are interested in public office. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your time in the Maryland General Assembly. And thinking back to that time, what prompted you to run for office? And what do you think were some of the biggest successes you had in the General Assembly?
Well, I mean, when I look back, I mean, part of it is that I always was interested in history and government in school. Maybe because I wasn't that great in science or math necessarily. So history and government were easy for me. But I was always fascinated with things like the founding fathers, the American Revolution, how government came about to be created and things of that nature. I also had a friend of my parents that they worked with closely, ran for the House of Delegates and was elected at a young age. So I got to see him move into office and see how his life changed doing that and some of the work that he was doing. But probably, and so I was always fascinated and enjoyed all that and paid attention to it. Probably the biggest thing that changed me though was I had a cousin, and a cousin of mine was this goes back to before any of the students who are watching were born, and that goes back to 1978 probably, or actually earlier than that, 1968, dealing with the election and the time of Vietnam War, and there's a lot of challenges. And I had a cousin who was in college on a scholarship and gave his scholarship up to go out and campaign across the country for a presidential candidate that he wanted to support. Well, you can imagine for a family who this was my oldest cousin, the first one to go through school, this was quite a shock to the family that he was giving up his career to go out and do something politically, which was not something my family did regularly. I thought that was fascinating, that he was somebody who was willing to put himself to the side and do something that he thought really was going to make a difference. And we had a chance to talk. And so at a young age, at 7th and 8th grade, this is ridiculous to say, but I would stay up all hours of the night watching the Democratic and Republican National Convention because it was just fascinating to me to see government work. So that's sort of what got me going, and it drove me to get involved and to run for elected office. That was my motivation, or the foundation of that. As far as my successes, it's tough to look back over a career and say, well, this bill was critically important or that bill was critically important. I think you have to look at the whole set of work that you do during that time. One of the first things I did was that being a lawyer, I think people said, well, we're going to put him on a judiciary committee. I said to the Speaker of the House, I don't want to go on Judiciary Committee. I argue with lawyers every day of the year. I don't want to do it for 90 days in Annapolis. But I know that budgets drive policy. And so please put me on a budget committee. So I started going on the Ways and Means Committee and then moved over to Appropriations Committee and then ultimately Budget and Tax. I'm one of a few, probably, couple dozen legislators in history who've served on all three budget committees in the Maryland General Assembly. So I'm very proud of what I learned from how government operates, how government functions, how budgets come into play, how things get implemented moving forward. And then I was also able to move into some leadership roles in that area and go into areas that I really didn't know much about. I ended up developing an expertise not only with budget, but also with transportation, and chaired a transportation subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, and was a subcommittee chair on appropriations where I oversaw 14 different department budgets, which is a pretty daunting task to do. If I had to think of a couple of bills I did pass, there's the first major bill I passed on was dealing with the length of trucks in the state of Maryland, expanding them from 48 feet to 52 feet as far as tractor trailers. That's because in Harford County, which I was representing, Frito-Lay came into town and it came up with a distribution site, and they wanted to have longer trucks because although they had a lot of product to put on the trucks, it wasn't heavy, so they wanted longer trucks. So that was a big battle that took about 12 years, and I was able to get that going past. And then I also had represented the northern end of Harford County that did a lot of horse breeding. And so I was the person who introduced the legislation that got simulcast betting done at racetracks. So now when you go to racetracks, you just don't bet at the races themselves, but also can bet on races across the country. And that was a major initiative and importance for the horse racing industry at that time. So those were two of the bills I remember, right off the top of my head in that during my career early on anyway.
Thanks. So that's actually really interesting, especially the Frito-Lay component and how an issue that's so important to an important constituent, an important business and employer, how that gets translated into legislation eventually. 12 years, that's a long time for a couple feet on a truck, right?
Well, and ironically, one of the major groups opposing it was Baltimore City and Baltimore City delegation. And that's because I think of when you think about it, all the trucks that come in and out of the Port of Baltimore, particularly going out the east side of Baltimore, obviously trucks are not a favored entity for that part of the city. So, so they were obviously representing their constituents and didn't want to see bigger trucks or more trucks. So it's just, it makes it, it was, as Tip O'Neill, the former speaker, said, all politics is local. So that's where this comes into play.
Definitely. When you think back to your time in the General Assembly, what were some of the biggest frustrations you had? And then what advice, if any, do you have for students that are thinking about running for office?
Couple things. One, I mean, first of all, I have to say is, I thoroughly enjoyed my time in the legislature. It was a tremendous honor to represent the citizens and be bestowed that trust by them to do that. And it's something I'll never forget and something I will always cherish. At the same time, you do become frustrated a little bit with the process. There is a reason for the process. Sometimes the process doesn't go as quickly as you like, or change doesn't come as quickly as you like it to be. I think the other part that probably was disturbing is the lack of understanding of either the process or the lack of understanding of the issues, and from the general public and even from legislators. Unfortunately, not all issues in public policy are black and white. There's a lot of gray, and you need to find how you can find that position in the middle, which doesn't necessarily make everybody totally happy, but does address the challenges that are there. And over time, I think we've become even less, we become more reluctant to let things look at issues and study the issues. I sometimes say that we rely on 30-second sound bites and bumper sticker slogans and what our policy positions are. And being somebody who studied public policy and political science and history, I think back to the revolutionary times when the Federalist Papers were out there and the public read the Federalist Papers to decide whether or not to ratify the Constitution. I can't imagine in this day and age that our public would take the time to invest the time necessary to learn about the various policy debates that are needed in determining what's good moving government forward and what the right policy is. So I think that was the frustration that I had, and sometimes still is, when I see people just give knee-jerk reactions without really thinking through the pros and cons of a position moving forward. As far as advice I would give to people who are looking to take on or maybe get into public service, first of all, do it. We need to have more quality people in public service, and not only elected public service, but just also working for government or government related agencies and things like that. But in doing so, make sure you're prepared, and make sure that you really want to do it and spend the time doing it. It does take a lot of work, but if you're passionate about the work, which is something that you should be as well, and that's being passionate, I think you can really be successful in that area. You definitely need to develop a thick skin. You need to not take things personally, and at the same time, when you arguing or debating an issue, don't take it personally from your side towards somebody else. Everybody, I remember when I practiced law, one of the things I used to say to a jury was, just remember, no matter how thin you slice something, there's always two sides to it. So there are always two sides to every issue, and you need to be cognizant of that and think about that and consider that. And then the others, don't be afraid to take positions. Make sure, obviously, you're thinking them out, but make sure that you do so. And if you're running for elective office, I think sometimes we worry too much, and I probably did to extent myself, was that you're always worried about the next election. The reality is that very few people serve for long extended periods of time for different reasons. So you really want to make sure that while you're there, you're having some impact and you're making a difference. So do what the right thing is, rather than worrying about the next election.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was really great. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier that I kind of underscored in my mind as well is just that sometimes things that are worth doing take a long time to do. And so it's sometimes frustrating for anyone in a work environment or when you're trying to make change to realize that that bill might not get passed this session or the next session. And if it's important to you, you have to keep at it.
And again, sometimes you may know more than other people do on the issue, not just because you become more knowledgeable about it or more engaged with it. And sometimes it takes a while to get everybody else to the same level of comfort that you are. So before a bill can be passed. So sometimes one of the slogans was, well, let's take a half a loaf this year and then we'll come back next year and see if we can get the rest of it the next year or so. But you're still making progress, but incremental progress is something that frequently happens in a legislative body rather than revolutionary process, revolutionary change, so to speak.
Absolutely. For the students and faculty and others who have joined us today, we're going to go through a few more of the questions that we had, but we will be setting aside some time here in about 15 minutes for you to ask questions. And I just wanted to remind you that there's a feature for Q&A, and then there's also a feature in the chat. The Q&A is preferred if you want to type in a question or start thinking about some of them now. And we have so many that we can save some as well. But Don, the next one I wanted to ask about, and this is really about your experience somewhat at UB. You earned your law degree here at the University of Baltimore. How well do you think your education in law prepared you for the roles that you've had? And then which skills or concepts do you use the most from either your law degree or your degree before that?
Without question, my law school experience has fended perfectly for me in all the various careers that I've had, whether it be obviously practicing law, which was critically important to me, but is also transcended into political world as well as with the Greater Baltimore Committee. And I think one of the major things that law school taught me to do was to really think. And how to actually analyze an issue. I'll never forget every night I'd read chapters in books and have a look at their different cases. And we'd have to take the cases down and break them down. And it was always, you break it down into facts, issues, rules, analysis, and conclusion. And you'd go through and list all those things. I will say that frequently that's almost the same process I go through when I look at a policy issue, or I look at an issue that we're dealing with at the GBC. You know, what are the facts? What are really the underlying issues that need to be addressed? How are we handling those now? What's the rule? How are we handling those now? Analyzing, are we doing it the right way? What are the other alternatives? Are there other best practices to do instead? And then conclusion, let's figure out what's the best way of approaching this issue and solving this problem. And now let's just go and do it. So it's not uncommon that I follow that exact same analysis as I did back in law school when I first came through the process, and frequently dealt with issues when clients brought me problems as well, and trying to look at what their situation was and address it. I think that the training is incredibly important for that. And then of course, the Socratic method of having the questions posed to you, or you having to debate back and forth with a professor without rather than just lecturing you and you taking notes. Actually having that give and take, it really also helps to expand your thinking process, doing it quickly on your feet. So all those things have been just been, I think, integral to my careers over the years.
Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Don, we were focusing this presentation for students. What types of advice do you have for how they might make the most of their college experience, having the benefit of hindsight?
Well, in hindsight, I would still say that my college years were certainly probably some of my most enjoyable years ever. I sometimes often say I wish I could go back to those 4 years and live them all over again. But it is a great training ground, obviously, for the future, and you need to take advantage of it. And it's not just the fact that you study hard and you try to figure out what's going to be your career path or your opportunities for you, which is critically important to do. But also, while you're going through college and going through that portion, developing those friends and those acquaintances and those relationships and just enjoying yourself. I think all of that is a key play. There are a number of former college classmates I have that I still keep in touch with, that I had strong relationships with, that even though we may not see each other, and then maybe we see each other more now than we used to with Facebook and things of that nature. But when you see them, it's almost like you just saw them yesterday because you had that close relationship with them and you rely on them. But then the other part of it is, and this is probably something I did not do as much as I wish I had, and that is to branch out beyond what your career ladder or your career subject matter might be, whether it be literature or arts. Having that well-rounded background or that well-rounded education. It's amazing how what you learn in other areas can really turn around and can help you in your career moving forward. I frequently wish that as I give speeches or talks that I was better versed in literature or things of that nature, so I could quote things that were said and experiences that people talked about moving forward. And then the other one is, get involved at school, get involved in civic activities. I went to Frostburg State University. I probably went there and played football. I'm probably one of the few people who was captain of the football team at the same time. Both of those gave me opportunities to be with different people who had different skills, different interests, different personalities, and really helped me grow and be able to address different dynamics moving forward in my career. So it's a great opportunity. It's a great training ground while you're in school, not only to develop what your career is going to be, but what you are as a person in your work or in your personal life.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that advice to our students. Next question we had is really kind of about the fact that, from several of your positions, you've worked with many different types of organizations. So certainly business but also levels of government, local, state, federal, and nonprofits as well. What are some of the commonalities and differences that you found in working with any of these different areas of government or business or nonprofits?
Well, I would think some of the commonalities are, first of all, when you look at the people, I think unfortunately we have a tendency in the media to focus on bad things that are there in different, whether it be in government or business or any sort of private sector entity. The reality is that a vast, vast majority of people are good people. They're well-intended. They want to do the right thing. And I think that exists in all different areas moving forward. I think also we talked about this a little bit earlier. Everybody has a similar level of commonality, so to speak, a level of frustration that you sort of wish things could get done more quickly. You wish things obviously happened and maybe were done exactly the way you think that they should be done, rather than compromising a little bit that's necessary. So I think that those are two of the things that I see from a commonality perspective and a frustration perspective. But those are things, again, that I think you just deal with as you go through, and you see it at all levels. I think I see it from business executives down to volunteers at not-for-profit organizations. They all have those same types of experiences, those same levels of engagement, and those same levels of frustration.
Thank you so much.
Don, what role has mentoring played in your career in terms of being a mentee and being a mentor? And then for students, what tips do you have for them about networking effectively? I think a lot of them feel a little bit angst about doing that and uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's, obviously a role of a mentor, or serving as a mentor, or being a mentee of someone is very, very important role that you have. I probably have different approaches than some people have had. I know many people will say, well, this one person is my mentor. And that's great. They rely upon that person heavily, and that person is a good sounding board for them and a good person that's an advisor of them. I seem to have had a number of different people who I rely to as time goes on, not necessarily the same person all the time, but maybe a person who has a different, I'm dealing with a different issue that I know this person has had a similar experience in that area. So I go to that person directly as somebody I've got that relationship with. So obviously the key is having relationships with a lot of different people that you can trust and that will listen to you and that you can listen to them. And then you've got to make the judgment call as to what you really should do moving forward, or what's your best approach. You're the one who ultimately has to make that decision. You're the one whose career or personal life is going to depend on that decision. You can't just say, well, this is what my mentor told me to do, I'm going to do that. But you want to use that advice from that mentor to follow. And when somebody comes to me, I try to explain to them, look, this is your call, but here's how I would look at this issue, and then maybe give them different options of how to move forward. With respect to networking, look, networking is never necessarily an easy thing to do. It's sort of out of the box for people, because suddenly you're meeting people that you just don't necessarily have a natural relationship with, or you had no knowledge of it. You're walking up to a face that you've never met before, and maybe a totally cold relationship. You've got to have a level of confidence with you and realize that that person's probably experiencing the same level of discomfort that you may be experiencing. So together you're going to be okay. I think really the key focus of networking is the fact that what you do with the connections that you make. Well, and it used to be when we were out in the public, it used to be easy to go different places and cocktail parties or events and things like that, and meet people and collect business cards. Well, that's a form of networking, but the way that you really make an impact on networking is, how do you take it to the next level? How do you turn that networking, that contact, into a relationship or to a business opportunity or a personal opportunity? And that requires work. It requires follow-up. It requires outreach. It requires responding to their needs and do that. So I think really it's a matter of just going out, being confident, recognizing that this other person that you're about to meet probably has that same level of discomfort that you do, but then realize that there may be opportunities for you to learn about each other moving forward, and that you can gather from that. I'll never forget the first time in a political world I went to a crab feast and had to sit there and walk around tables and introduce myself with people who really did not want to meet me. They'd rather eat crabs and drink beer than listen to some guy say he was running for office. But you get over that pretty quickly and realize that after the first couple of times, it's not that bad.
Thank you.
Was that Mako by chance?
No, it was at a American Legion Hall, just locally in Harford County.
Every time I hear about crab feasts and politics, I think of the Maryland Association of Counties meeting.
Yeah, there's a large one there as well, that's for sure.
Indeed, but they're everywhere in our state. Thank you so much for that answer. Yeah, our next question is really about public service generally. What have you found to be the most gratifying thing about public service, and then maybe the most frustrating or challenging? It doesn't have to be frustrating.
And I hope I'm not overly repeating myself, but the thing that I've really enjoyed throughout the time, whether it be really from practicing law or in the legislature or even at the Greater Baltimore Committee, is problem solving. I get a lot of satisfaction out of looking at an issue, seeing a problem or a challenge that's out there, trying to find a solution to that problem that's going to address what's wrong or what needs to be corrected. Making a difference in helping people really does, I think, is something that just, as I mentioned earlier, I think gets my juices flowing. Is something I really enjoy doing. And I think I get a lot of satisfaction in doing that. Yeah, I will tell you, when I talk about the JCs, I mentioned that earlier. One of the first community projects we were involved in was a woman who came down with multiple sclerosis, I guess, and was suddenly found herself confined to a wheelchair after having been a teacher for many years. And we went out and built a wheelchair ramp at her home. And just watching her be able to come out of that house in the wheelchair, go down the ramp and go out to the mailbox and get mail that day was just an incredible, rewarding experience to me, because you can make a difference in a person's life. You actually opened up a door and gave her freedom that she did not enjoy before. Those are the types of things that I think really do make a difference, and you feel good when you do something like that. Now, that's a very specific issue, and it goes the same way with policy issues. As far as frustration, I mentioned them again before. I think the lack of understanding and appreciation of the complexity of issues. Things are not easy. Roger, you mentioned that things take time to be solved sometimes. They usually are problems because they weren't problems overnight. They developed over a period of years. And it's going to take a number of years to change that policy or change that situation. You're not going to flip a switch and things change overnight. So I think that, and there's a lack of understanding of that. And then most recently, I think clearly the partisanship and the polarization that exists in government, the lack of willing to compromise, the fact that people think that compromise is a bad thing to do, and it shows a sign of weakness rather than a sign of strength that you're solving an issue. That to me is probably the two areas that are most frustrating to me from a political, from just a general perspective. And it's not just always politics, it's any issues whatsoever that we hear on a daily basis. There is the lack of understanding and the fact of people put themselves into a corner, and once you're into a corner, it's tough to really find a place in the middle to find a real answer to the problems.
Thanks so much. And I know we have a couple more questions left, but I saw one from Dr. Wyatt Nickel in the chat. Looked really great. I thought, Don, she asks, what are your recommendations for bringing Americans back to the center, or civility for that matter? And how might we avoid another January 6th? That's a big question there. But
yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's hard to believe that January 6th ever happened. And that's very disturbing. Yeah, what do we need to do to bring us back to the middle, or bring us back, not to the middle, I don't think, but just to a level of civility? I think somehow we have to really emphasize to our elected officials when we see them face to face and maybe at the ballot box, that we don't accept the fact that you just are one side or another side on a particular issue, that we want you to be open-minded, that it's not just because of this is going to get you elected. We want you to actually make progress. We want to see things change. There's a lot of debate about term limits and whether or not so, and I can argue it both ways, having been in office. Although I think to some extent, I'm starting to believe that we need to be paying some attention to term limits, that maybe there is a level, whether it's not necessarily 2 terms, it's maybe 3 terms or 4 terms, but maybe there's a point in time that we need some new fresh blood and we need some new eyes on a particular issue. So you're not stuck with where you are. I think also we need to look at the election process that we go through. And Roger, I know we've had these debates before about there's different ways of electing people in primary elections or general elections or runoff elections and things like that. I think we may need to do that to shake things up a little bit. So it's not just the same old approach all the time. But the key is people are in office and they take these positions because they can do so. And the way they can do so is because we're empowering them to do so. We need as citizens to say, this is not acceptable as an elected official. This is what my expectations are of you. This is what I want you to do. This is how I want to address a problem. And if you won't do that, I don't care how long you've been in office, it's time for us to have a change.
Yeah, thank you. And great question. And again, as we continue, please feel free to bring us questions in the Q&A function of the webinar or the chat if you're finding that easier on yourself as well. Anne?
Thanks, Roger. What advice do you have, Don, for students who are starting out their careers? Like, what do you wish the people that you hire as new employees knew about coming into public service and as an employee in a professional position?
Well, again, because I'm probably a public servant wonk, so to speak, I urge people to do it if they want to do it. We need good people. We need more people in there. It's important that we have that. It's a rewarding experience. But if you're going to do it, you need to do it for the right reasons. Do it because you want to make things better, that you want to solve problems, that you want to help people, you want to make the difference. I'd also urge people that, sometimes we see people on TV and we think, oh, it's great that this person is on TV and how people really seem to go to them. It's important to be, I sometimes think it's important to be more of a workhorse than a show horse. That's where really the work gets done in government and in public service. That's where the real differences are. There are people who are very successful by being on TV and they love the camera and the camera loves them. But the people who are really doing a lot of the hard work are those workhorses behind the scenes who are really studying issues, making a difference, and maybe setting the agenda for those people who are on TV moving forward. So, I urge people to do that. So don't necessarily do it because you're looking for accolades, but you're doing it because of that personal satisfaction or gratification that you're making a difference in the world. And it doesn't matter what age you are. Even if you're in the middle of your, I know a lot of people who go to law school or go to grad school do it after they've been out of school for a while and they're thinking maybe it's time to change. You shouldn't shy away from it just because you're in a mid-career level of your life. It can be very rewarding to make that change, and you can make a huge difference because you're going to bring experiences and knowledge that other people don't necessarily have. And that's what we need to have. You don't want people sitting in a room saying, well, let's approach it this way because that's what we learned in school, or this is the way we've always done it before. You need other people who are going to say, look, I've been in a similar situation. This is how we address the problem. This is how I think it's analogous to this situation. And those experiences, those opportunities that you have in a different private sector or maybe another different public sector role can really be instrumental in changing policy, changing direction, and making an influence as well. So it's not just young people coming out of school, it's also people who have gone back to school as to enhance their education or maybe to make a career change. I think public service is a very gratifying thing to be involved in. And we probably don't give the credit for people who do so to the level that we should. And the students that you're teaching and training and educating over the years, unfortunately, we focus too much on some of the negative things that happen and some of the problems that don't get solved rather than the fact of all the good things that really are being done behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Don, in the course of every person's career, and, I reflect back on mine and you probably have on yours as well. And there's things that you wanted and you were thinking about when you were early in your career. And then in the middle frame there, you get more skills and you're thinking about, some are thinking about moving up or doing things differently. The middle is a different place. And then nearing the end of a career is a different place too. Maybe if you don't mind, if you could share some advice for people who are in the middle of their career and those that might be getting closer to retirement in some cases.
Well, since I'm one who's getting close to retirement, that may not be too close as far as anything else. But again, back on the people who are maybe in the middle of their career, I think there's a tendency, and it's different from different generations. I mean, my father was a elementary school principal for 36 years. And I know a lot of people who once they did something, they never changed their career. And that's the way it used to be years ago. Everybody stayed there. Young people are coming out and they're moving from one job to another, seeing different opportunities. And I think that for some people, they find that troublesome. For other people, it's like, hey, this is a great way to have different experiences. So a person who's in the middle of their career, I think what they're wrestling with is the fact that I've made it to this certain point. Do I have to take a step back? And oftentimes I think you have to look at it, it's not a step back if it's something that you really want to pursue, if it's something that you're really passionate about, if it's something that you really have a level of expertise. We don't necessarily know what our abilities are until we get into a certain role and then see what our strengths and weaknesses are. I frequently will ask people who we interview for jobs at GBC, what are your biggest strengths? And they'll tell me what they think their biggest strengths are. But then you say, well, what are your biggest weaknesses? Well, nobody wants to own up to weaknesses, but they have to think about it, but then they'll come up with some. Just looking at your strengths and weaknesses can really help you decide, is there a different career path that's good for me? And even though it might be a lateral movement or possibly a step back financially, it oftentimes will result in another pathway that leads you to greater career success or greater personal satisfaction. And when we talk about this work home balance and things of that nature, sometimes that's a big factor that comes into play as well. As someone who's retiring or going to the retirement, I'm looking at June 1st as my last day at the GBC. I don't know what opportunities will present themselves. There may be opportunities to present themselves. There may not. I've had some discussions. I think you need to be open-minded. You'll get a lot of advice from people who have retired that tell you all kinds of things that what you should do or what you shouldn't do. Again, just like we talked about with mentors, I think you listen, you absorb, and then you got to make a decision of what's best for you at that particular time.
No, thanks for that. And I'd seen that you had announced your retirement, and saying this not just with kindness, but just for real. There's going to be a lot of people missing you in this role, but I also think it's extremely exciting. And I sometimes joke to Ann that I aspire to retirement, but then I don't know when I get there. There's so many exciting and wonderful things to do, and I often joke with folks too about failing retirement because they get busier in retirement than they were when they were not. So
those are all issues that come to mind as well, Roger. No doubt about that. A lot of people say to me, well, what's your next plan? I'm like, well, I really don't have one right now, but some people have talked to me about a couple of things and they're like, oh no, we know you're going to do something. I'm like, well, I don't know that we'll see. Hard to say. But thank you. It's very kind of you to say that. And I've enjoyed working with you and University of Baltimore. In fact, I taught classes years ago at University of Baltimore and enjoyed the teaching experience back at that time as well.
Look out, I just made a note of that. And I think Ann did too. As
More
well.
opportunity. Actually, I had one question. When you were talking about all the committees that you have, and you had 200 people work on a committee to look at an issue. We have a lot of working professionals that are involved in our school. We have a lot of people like me. How do people get involved with the work at GBC? How do they volunteer to work on this project?
That's great. Great question, Ann. And we encourage as many people to participate as possible. As I said, GBC is a membership organization. So the company joins the GBC. But when a company joins the GBC, and this is a challenge that we have and challenge to get the word out, all employees of that company are a member of the GBC. So all of those people who are employees at company XYZ can participate on any of our boards, and you go online and you can see the list of the boards that are there, and you just volunteer that you want to be a member of the board. If you want to be on the Education and Workforce Committee, you do not have to be an educator. You don't have to be somebody who's involved in workforce development. You could be somebody who just wants to see how people can be better in the workplace, and you want to be a part of that. You want to be a part of developing new ideas, new curricula, new thoughts. So our Education and Workforce program a couple of years ago developed a manual of how you can do effective internships at a business, because all the time we talk about internships, but sometimes the internships are not as successful for the business or for the intern as they should be. So what can you do? We brought people together on that committee who had been involved in internships and came up with what they could do and gave sort of just almost a guide to how you can be effective in that sort of area. So, and I think the more people that we get involved with our committees and the more diverse the views and perspectives are, the better product that you have that develops. Just like saying from a legislative perspective, the more voices that you hear, the more likely you're going to hear all the different positions, and you can come up with a policy position, or you can come up with a program, or come up with an initiative that makes a difference. So we welcome. Now that situation, we had no idea what was going to happen. At that time, I was executive vice president. We said, let's go and put out these 5 different city departments, and let's put out a call for volunteers. And it was like, well, how many volunteers do you think we'll get? And we were like, well, who knows, maybe 100. Well, five departments turned into 250 volunteers, turning into 50 subcommittees, and making about 270 recommendations over a 4.5 month period of time. And it was amazing the commitment that people had once they had. And one of the great experiences that we find is that we have great success when we do a project, and Roger was a part of this a couple of years ago, when we have a starting point and an ending point. People will definitely get engaged in it, and they know there's a start, there's a goal, and there's going to be an end, and what the expectation of that time frame is going to be. They will get involved in that area. If it's something that they think they're being sentenced to a life term on a committee, they don't necessarily want to get that engaged in an effort like that. But so I ask our committees to be either policy or project oriented. So we either moving toward accomplishing a policy or trying to accomplish a project in the future. And that gives us sort of a starting point and ending point. But we welcome as many people to get engaged as possible. It's a challenge to get into the bowels of a company, because it's tough to communicate to everybody that's at a company necessarily.
Thanks, I really appreciate that.
That was really great advice. And now I want to piggyback on it for our students as well. I mean, the University of Baltimore is a member, and some of our employees, faculty and staff have served on some of your committees, Don, and we really appreciate that. And I've appreciated very much the opportunity to work with you myself. But for the students, something that I've often talked about is just how important and how great an opportunity it is to serve on committees. And some advice I would give as well is you'd be quite surprised if you look at the city of Baltimore or your hometown or any county in this region for their list of boards and commissions. You'll be quite surprised that they're always looking for members of some of those commissions, because people roll off, and you can almost find anything that aligns to your passion and your interests. And even if you think it might not be something that you are an expert on, I encourage you to look into it and apply, because some of the greatest experiences I've ever had have been serving on boards or commissions and then finding that this was extremely important stuff that had layers of interest to it, even if sometimes the committee or commission doesn't have a particularly exciting title to it. Everyone wants to be on the board of zoning because it's powerful. But interestingly enough, the tree commission, even though that doesn't sound as important, wrestles with a host of issues and really interesting public policy issues. And, you serve on one, and then next thing you know, you get known and they start asking you to serve on all kinds of them. Which can be a curse too. Know when to say no, know when to say when. But really take a look at the websites of your local governments and look for those opportunities, and then ask folks about it. And don't be afraid to apply. You will absolutely be enriched by serving, and they want you to serve, even if you think you might not be ready yet.
I might take that a step further, Roger, and say it's not necessarily just government entities, but also look at the nonprofit world that's out there. There are an enormous number of not-for-profits in Baltimore City or in the entire region that cover all types of areas of interest, whether it could be in education, it could be in parks and recreation, it could be in all types of different fields, environment. And they're always looking to have volunteers and new people come to the table because they have people who have been there for a long time who are looking for an exit strategy to some extent and want to see a new group of people come in. They want to see new ideas that are into their area so they're not stuck in the same mode that they've been forever. So, again, they're non-paying jobs, but it's a great opportunity to learn. It's a great opportunity to demonstrate your capacity and your ability. And as you said, Roger, oftentimes when you go there seriously and take the work seriously, that leads to other opportunities that are even bigger to deal with, or something that you really, you can almost sort of start asking, this is something I'm interested in. Can you help me go there? And they'll find you because you've done a good job for them. They'll help you find a location and another role that's out there publicly.
It's also a really good way to try out a new career. If you're thinking about a new area, to volunteer with a nonprofit and learn more about that and see if you really do love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mentioned earlier, my work at the Bel Air JCs, that was a volunteer type of an organization. It was a, sort of a leadership development concept more than anything else. And we did civic work, civic projects in the community. And a lot of my connections politically came through work like that. And because I met other people in other or similar type of organizations, or even met people in communities that we were affecting, and that became part of my base of development moving forward. So you never know where those opportunities may lead. And again, there's a multitude of those out there for you to explore.
Absolutely. And as you were referring to, building networks, you sure do make a lot of friends that way too. I mean, from different jobs that you may not, you see the folks you work with all the time, and you see your neighbors all the time, but then the chance to meet and work with somebody from a totally different business or nonprofit or field is just really great. And, being able to see new ways of doing things is something that I've always loved about it as well. I certainly want to invite, we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to invite any more questions from our audience and our attendees today. And I appreciate also too the warm thoughts in the chat from those who have been attending as well. And certainly, Ann, jump in if you have other questions as well.
My favorite question is, what question didn't we ask you that you'd like to answer?
Can't think of one answer I don't want to answer. But
And you would like to answer.
I would like to answer.
Not
Don't
want
want to
to.
answer.
I would like to answer. Okay. I think the answer, the question I'd like to answer is the fact that we're certainly going through sort of what I see currently. And we're certainly going through some very challenging times, and we have seen in the last decade, and I'm not going to be specific, but definitely in the last decade, a whole change in the way that I think the public perceives government, the way the public perceives elected officials, the way the public perceives how we move forward. And I think that somehow we've got to take a step back and realize that there's no perfect answer. There's no perfect solution to everything that we're dealing with. We talked earlier about how we get away from the polarization. I think that's part of what it is. It's the reality is that you're not going to find the perfect solution. Sometimes, the perfect is the enemy of good. And we seek for that. But not only is the perfect the enemy of good, but sometimes what Ann you think might be perfect and Roger what you think perfect are two totally different things, and we can't necessarily resolve that dynamic. So I think we've got to change somehow in our society that we look at issues and say, let's take a step back. Let's take a deep breath. Let's figure out what are the dynamics that are coming into play here. How do we get to this point? If we got to this point deliberately, did we do so? Where do we make steps along the way that were wrong? What did we do wrong? And let's go back to try to correct those. If we didn't get here intentionally, then let's take the chance of changing things now and doing things a little bit differently. We can't keep doing it same over and over again. We can't keep necessarily having the same policy principles over and over again. The world is changing a lot. We mentioned earlier with COVID, right now, we've had a vision for years of what the workplace is going to look like. I mean, what the office is going to look like. We never thought of remote work the way we've thought about in the past, in the last 2 years. But think about that further. What impact's that going to have on like commercial real estate? There's a whole business of commercial real estate that's going to be affected if only one third of the workforce stays home working remotely. I'm not saying that's wrong, but how do we address that? Because of what we went through, a lot of women have been disproportionately affected in the workplace because of childcare and because we lost a lot of people in the childcare area industry and things of that nature. We need to, so maybe government hasn't traditionally been a big supporter of childcare. They've let the private sector do it or not-for-profits do it. Maybe we're gonna have to look at things differently and say, hey, we need government to step in and do something in this area. Same with nurses. I mean, nurses have gone through, and healthcare providers have gone through enormous pressure over the last 2 years. The way we used to train them, the way we used to make them go through licensing, maybe we need to do things differently. So I think we sometimes just have to don't accept things as status quo, but look at the current situation and maybe figure out better ways of adjusting it. And I think, unfortunately, we rely too much on our knee-jerk reaction. Well, that's the way it's always been. Well, that doesn't mean that's the way it's got to be moving forward. And I hope that in answering this, I'm urging people, let's be open-minded, let's be thoughtful, let's be deliberate, and let's try to find a solution to problems that really are going to benefit people, not just tomorrow, but the decade from now as well.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate those thoughts. I think one thing COVID's taught us is we can transition a lot more quickly than we ever thought we could because we had to. And I think applying those principles to some of these intractable problems or seemingly intractable problems might help us open our minds a bit.
COVID's also brought about a little bit new vocabulary. We probably use the words pivot more than we've ever used in our lives over the last couple of years. We're returned to normalcy, but we don't know exactly what that's going to be between those two phrases over the years, to say the least.
Pivot and you're muted, right?
You're on mute.
No, I was thinking about this with a very current issue. But what you said is just so really wise and powerful. I mean, today in the Sun, and I think other reporters are reporting on, the question of things have opened up, but why hasn't Baltimore City Hall opened up, for instance? And then when you start digging into it, it's really complex, and people are struggling with how to manage change, but also how to grab the opportunity for change. And as I was reflecting on it, as I was asked about it, Don, is, if you think about it, on one hand, cities, not just our city, but cities everywhere have been able to reach more people through online mechanisms and, grant permits perhaps, or work with and meet with people who need help virtually, more than they've ever seen. And similar with a city council meeting or another hearing. But then when you go back in person, it's hard sometimes. You've got to get new technology to have that meeting both in person and online at the same time. So you might be struggling, or maybe they're struggling with, well, if I go back in person, I'm not going to reach as many people. So I better get some tech in place. And it has layers, and you can't have a city council meeting twice, one for one audience and one for another. So it's really, and this has happened into us in higher education as well. I mean, with classes, how do you offer a class to reach, or an event like this, which may have so much more attendance than maybe an in-person one would?
We have the exact same challenge we're going through now. I mean, we've been remote for 2 years, 2+ years, about 2 years, I guess. And I mentioned our committees. Our committees used to be in person. People would come to the GBC and sit there in a committee room for an hour and a half and talk about a particular issue. And then they'd go back to their workplace. Sometimes that required them to drive and park and then drive back to their offices and things like that. I will acknowledge that our committee attendance has increased since we've gone on Zoom. At the same time, and you talked about networking, I've yet to see I know many people have tried, at least me personally, I've yet to see how you can effectively network on Zoom. It's difficult to do. You can have interaction like we're having, but to network and really create that networking experience and create those relationships, is tough to do that on Zoom. So I'm hoping that we can bring people, and we are contemplating bringing people back into the GBC offices for those committee meetings. But at the same time, I know that there's probably going to be some resistance because people have enjoyed doing it from maybe their offices at their desk, or maybe from home, and not going through walking on a miserable day like today and going through the rain or things of that nature. So it's going to be a challenge. At the same time, Roger, is, do you have the technology? Can you do a hybrid type of a meeting? Can the hybrid meeting be as effective as it could be if you were in person? And I think there's a challenge for the hybrid meeting to be as effective as it is in person, because you don't see the dynamics, you don't see the body language necessarily. And the body language can tell you a lot in a meeting about what the person's saying or how they really feel about an issue. You can't really see the body language of other people. If they're in the room, you can see them, but on Zoom, you don't necessarily pick up their body language. And particularly, and it's one of the sad things I see, and look, I'm probably a culprit myself, but when people turn off their video and you only see the black screen or their name or something like that, and they may still be attending the meeting, but it's just not quite the same personal interaction. And I think that we need to find, maybe need to develop new protocols of how to address some of those challenges.
Yeah, it's really, all of that is so great. I mean, it's hard to network via chat. That's how you have your private conversation on a Zoom format. And you miss the conversations in line to the, the breakfast table or the lunch table at a meeting too. Which, so it's so very true. Well, I wanted to just end by saying to everyone who attended tonight, thank you so much for being with us. And I wanted to thank you, Don, so very much for being our guest this evening. Everything that you've said today was just really inspiring and really interesting to me personally, and I know it was to our students. We really appreciate it. I also wanted to say to our students, this has been a busy day at UB. I wanted to remind you of something. If you weren't aware, there is a career fair that is still going on campus right now, and you're able to jump onto that right after this, and we really encourage you to do so. And there's also a vigil tonight for the issues that are focused on the war in the Ukraine, which is on main campus outside in Gordon Plaza, started about 5 o'clock, but it's going on till 7. So if any of you are on campus, feel free to check that out as well. But Don, thank you so much. And thank you so much as well.
Roger, thank you. I really appreciate it. Ann, thank you very much for the questions. I hope that I address them in a way that is beneficial for the students and beneficial, obviously, for this program. And I commend you for what you're trying to do to reach out to students and help them in their careers. This is the type of program that I think really can make a difference and prepare them. And if they pick up even a couple little tidbits of information and advice, I think that goes a long way. And I hope that I was able to do that during today's meeting. And thank you for all that you do. University of Baltimore is a great institution, as I wouldn't be where I was, but for my experience at UB Law School, and enjoyed it tremendously. And it's been a great impact on me.
Gosh,
Thanks so
thank
much,
you.
Don. Been terrific.
We look forward to having you back with us too very soon, and let's catch up soon as well. And congrats on your retirement.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Take care. And
See you.
thanks,
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Bye-bye.